The difficulties of this girl are now your responsibility. That was the only phrase the old man uttered, pointing at me with a trembling yet firm finger, under the astonished gaze of his son, a businessman who had just stepped out of an armored vehicle. I was merely a stranger, someone who had offered him water and company for 15 days in the stifling waiting room of a public hospital. I never imagined that this simple act of compassion would completely change my destiny. Right when I thought life had thrown me into the darkest abyss. Everything began a few weeks earlier under the unbearable heat of Dust Valley. My name is Elena Vargas. I was 28 years old and my hands, rough and stained with oil, were my greatest pride. I was the best maintenance mechanic at the largest textile factory in the region. I knew the character of those enormous industrial machines better than my own. I could hear the failure of a gear from meters away and my fingers could adjust nuts with a precision no man in the plant could match. But talent means nothing when an entire industry collapses. The economic crisis hit our country with the force of a silent hurricane. One Tuesday afternoon, the deafening hum of the looms that had been the soundtrack of my life for a decade stopped abruptly. The foreman handed me a manila envelope. He did not look me in the eyes. "Elena, you are the best we have, but there is no more money to pay anyone," he murmured. The dismissal letter weighed less than a feather but fell on me like a lead slab. 8 years of loyalty, of breathing cotton lint and rust, reduced to a miserable severance that would barely allow me to survive a couple of months. I walked out through the large rusted iron gate. The suffocating air of Dust Valley burned my lungs. I looked at my calloused hands and for the first time in my life felt they were worth absolutely nothing. I returned to our small house with a heavy heart. My father, Javier Vargas, a retired miner of few words but noble soul, was sitting in the dim light trying to tune an old radio. Seeing my face, he did not need to ask. He turned off the radio, stood up slowly and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "As long as we have health, Elena, no storm is eternal. You have a gift in those hands. We will get through this." He comforted me with his hoarse voice. But fate seemed determined to prove otherwise. The real tragedy arrived just 3 days later, disguised as a violent tropical storm. That night the rain lashed the tin roof with relentless fury. I was trying to seal a leak when I heard a sound that still freezes my blood today. The crash of a glass against the cement floor, followed by a dull thud. I ran to the kitchen. My father was on the floor clutching his chest, his face pale and covered in cold sweat. An acute heart attack. The phone lines were down because of the storm and there was no time to find an ambulance that would never reach our neighborhood. Desperation gave me a strength I did not know I had. I lifted him onto an old wooden cart we used for firewood. I covered him with thick plastic and went out into the street under the downpour. I pushed the cart through the thick red mud of Dust Valley. Slipping, crying, shouting at my father not to close his eyes. The rain washed away my tears and the wind drowned my voice. When we finally crossed the emergency doors of the municipal hospital, my world had already turned an oppressive grey. While the doctors took my father away, a tired-looking nurse handed me a paper. The amount I had to pay as a deposit for the emergency surgery was astronomical. I looked at that number, then at my empty pockets and knew I had reached the end of the road. Friends listening to me, sometimes life pushes us to the edge of the abyss to teach us how to fly. If this story of struggle and overcoming resonates in your hearts, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like to help us inspire more people and tell me in the comments from which city or country you are joining me today. Your support is the light that keeps this community alive. Let us continue with the story. With the medical bill trembling in my hand, I knew my only option was to swallow my pride. I had to seek out my older sister Valeria. She had married Alejandro, a contractor who had made a small fortune taking advantage of the region's real estate crisis. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a humid and sticky heat that suffocated. I arrived at their house, a 2-story chalet protected by high brick walls in the city's most affluent neighborhood. When I rang the doorbell, the aroma of grilled meat, a good barbecue, hit my empty stomach, reminding me I had gone almost 24 hours without eating. Valeria opened the door, seeing my soaked clothes and shoes covered in red mud. Her face paled. Alejandro was sitting at the head of a large mahogany table, cutting a piece of meat with deliberation and drinking red wine. I explained our father's situation with a broken voice, asking for a loan that I swore to repay with the sweat of my brow. The silence that followed in that dining room was colder than the storm wind. Alejandro wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin. He looked me up and down with poorly disguised disdain and sighed. "Elena, business is very difficult," he began in that condescending tone he always used with me. Your father is already an old man. A heart attack at his age. Well, it's the law of life. Putting a fortune into a public hospital is throwing money into a bottomless pit. Besides, now you have no job. How do you plan to repay me? Valeria lowered her head, not daring to contradict her husband. Alejandro reached into his pocket, took out a handful of crumpled bills and threw them on the table. Here, it's all I can give you and you don't need to repay me. Consider it alms for the old man. I looked at those crumpled bills. They did not cover even a tenth of the deposit the hospital demanded. A cold fury, born from the deepest humiliation, straightened my spine. This was not family in front of me. It was a soulless creditor. Keep it, Alejandro, I said, forcing my voice to sound firmer than the steel I used to shape in the factory. I would rather dig the earth with my own hands than let my father live off your contempt. Enjoy your meal. I turned around and left that opulent house, feeling that the cold of the world had just frozen the little hope I had left. I returned to the municipal hospital. My father survived the surgery, but the price was high. The right half of his body was paralyzed and he had lost the ability to speak clearly. They moved him to a shared room, a gloomy space with peeling walls where the heat was so dense it could almost be cut with a knife. Next to us, in bed number 4, lay another old man. His name, according to the nurses, was Don Mateo. He was a man with completely white hair, a face furrowed with deep wrinkles that gave him an air of severe, almost intimidating dignity. He had also suffered a stroke, but unlike my father, he was completely alone. No one visited him during visiting hours. No family brought him hot food or clean clothes. It was rumored in the hallways that his family had paid the medical expenses in advance but had abandoned him to his fate. One afternoon, while I was moistening my father's lips with a gauze, I heard a muffled groan from the adjacent bed. Don Mateo was trying to reach a glass of lemon water that a nurse had left on his nightstand. His left hand trembled violently. I saw his fingers brush the glass, about to spill the liquid on the bed. His gaze was filled with painful frustration, the rage of a proud man trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him. My own life was a disaster. Debts piled up like mountains of rubble. I barely ate once a day to save money and the future was a black hole. What right did I have to feel sorry for another person? However, seeing that old man struggling for a simple sip of water, I thought of my father. If I were not there, my father would be exactly like him. I stood up from my plastic chair, approached bed number 4 and took the glass. He looked at me surprised, almost defensive. Let me help you, Don Mateo, I said in a kind whisper. I held his head gently and let him drink little by little. When he finished, his grey eyes, clouded by age and illness, locked onto mine. His lips moved clumsily and in a thread of voice he murmured, "Thank you, young lady." From that day it became a habit. When I gave puree to my father, I also helped him eat. When I wiped the sweat from my father's forehead in the midday heat, I changed the towel and wiped Don Mateo's. The other families in the room looked at me as if I were crazy. They whispered behind my back saying I was stupid for wasting my little energy on a stranger who probably would not even remember my name. But I was not looking for any reward. I simply could not bear to see so much loneliness. What I completely ignored was that the silent eyes of that old man were watching every one of my movements, evaluating my soul in the middle of the worst hell of my life. 15 days passed. 15 long days of the smell of cheap disinfectant and nights sleeping in a wobbly plastic chair. Against all odds, both my father and Don Mateo showed signs of improvement. The old man in bed number 4 could now sit up and move his left arm a little. One morning, during the medical round, the doctor announced that Don Mateo was stable enough to be discharged and continue his recovery at home. I was happy for him. I really was. Although deep in my chest I felt a small emptiness. Caring for him had become an anchor that prevented me from sinking into my own despair. The next day, the weather in Dust Valley was strangely calm. I was packing Don Mateo's few belongings into an old cloth bag when an unusual noise broke the monotony of the hospital. Through the window I saw a huge black SUV with tinted armored windows stop in front of the main entrance. A couple of minutes later, the door to our dilapidated room opened abruptly. A man about 40 years old entered. He wore a tailored linen suit, Italian shoes and a watch that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. He had a furrowed brow and an aura of absolute authority, but beneath the facade his eyes revealed a mixture of exhaustion and guilt. "Father," he said in a hoarse voice, quickly approaching the bed. Don Mateo did not flinch, barely turned his face toward the wall, clenching his jaw. The man, ignoring my presence, sat on the edge of the bed and took from his leather briefcase a thick envelope bulging with stacks of bills. "Forgive me for not being here," the man pleaded with a vulnerability that contrasted with his appearance. "Business in the capital was chaos. I brought this. It's for you, so you can have the best care at home. I will take you to a private clinic on Sunny Coast if you wish." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the nurses in the hallway stopped to look. Don Mateo slowly turned his head, looked at the envelope full of dollars, then at his son and finally, with tremendous effort, raised his trembling arm, but not to take the money. Don Mateo pushed the envelope away with a weak swipe and pointed directly at me. His bony and implacable finger pointed at me while I stood frozen next to my father's bed. With a cavernous voice forcing every syllable, the old man uttered the phrase that would change everything. "I do not need your money," Don Mateo declared, fixing his gaze on the suited man. "For 15 days, the one who gave me water, who cleaned me, who treated me like a human being, was her." He coughed, catching his breath, and continued. "Her father is dying. They have nothing. The difficulties of this girl are now your responsibility." The elegant man stood petrified. Slowly he turned his head and looked at me for the first time. His sharp and calculating eyes scanned my worn clothes, my hands stained with machine grease and my face gaunt from exhaustion. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. I had not helped that old man expecting a reward, much less an order like that. Without asking questions, the man nodded to his father, put away the envelope and walked toward me. He stopped a meter away, made a slight bow that left me bewildered and spoke in a completely different tone, full of deep respect. "My name is Sebastian Castillo," he said, "and what my father orders, I fulfill. Let's talk outside, please." I followed him to the small hospital balcony, where the dense city air hit our faces. Sebastian did not beat around the bush. "Elena, I know who you are. I asked the nurses before entering. I know you lost your job at the textile factory and your father's situation. Listen carefully. From today, all medical bills, rehabilitation and private specialists for Don Javier run on my account." I raised my hands, frightened by the magnitude of his offer. "No, Mr. Castillo, I did not do it for money. It was just a bit of human help," I stammered. He raised a hand, stopping me. "I know, and precisely because you did not do it for interest. My father, a man who has known betrayal closely, entrusted you with his dignity. But I am not offering you charity. Elena, my father told me about your calloused hands." Sebastian took out a shiny business card and handed it to me. "I have a business partner on the southern coast in Sunny Coast. He owns an industrial conglomerate of precision machinery. He is desperately looking for mechanics who understand old machines and can adapt them to new technology. I offer you a job, Elena, a salary that triples what you earned here, housing and the opportunity to start from zero. You will earn every cent with your own sweat. Do you accept?" I leaned against the rusted railing. I looked at the dusty horizon of my ruined city. Then I looked at the card in my hand. It was not just a job offer. It was a ticket out of hell. I nodded with tears of gratitude burning my eyes. The wheel of my destiny had just taken a violent and wonderful turn. Sebastian was not a man of empty words. That same afternoon, the abyss of debts that suffocated me disappeared. He transferred my father to a recovery suite in a private clinic with physiotherapists at his full disposal. The news of this drastic change spread through the streets of Dust Valley faster than wildfire and of course reached the ears of my brother-in-law Alejandro. 2 days before my departure to the south, Alejandro appeared at the clinic. He wore a half-open silk shirt and held a half-smoked cigar. His face, previously full of contempt, was now a mask of exaggerated kindness. "Sister-in-law," he exclaimed, opening his arms when he saw me in the hallway. "Valeria and I were so worried. I heard you have very influential friends. Is this Mr. Castillo really a magnate? Could you introduce me? My construction company could do good business with him." I looked at him fixedly. I remembered the smell of grilled meat and the crumpled bills thrown on the mahogany table. I felt no anger, but a deep pity for his spiritual misery. "Alejandro," I said in an icy voice that made him erase his smile. "In the darkest moment of my life, I discovered who would extend a hand to me and who would enjoy watching me fall. Keep your cigar and your false smiles. My connections do not feed on people like you. Do not come looking for me again." I turned my back on him, leaving him with the word in his mouth, paralyzed by humiliation in the middle of the impeccable clinic hallway. That was my farewell to Dust Valley. I left my father under the best possible care with the promise to return for him as soon as I settled. With a small suitcase